Hi, how you doing? Justin here. Today I am joined by a very special guest star. This is Martin Taylor, everybody. Incredible.
Hello there.
Guitar player.
Nice to be here.
And we're going to talk today a little bit about ear training and how to develop that connection between your ear and your hand and how to make that happen. I've always thought transcribing was the way, and Martin has that ability, you know, way better than I've ever had it, and he doesn't transcribe. So how does it work for you? How have you built the connection?
Well, first of all, when I started to play, I couldn't read music, so I couldn't read music for the first, 15 years of playing, which in some ways kind of held me back a little bit. But then all my friends just learned by putting on records. You know, in those days you'd put the record on and you'd play something, and then you'd try and learn a phrase, and then you'd get the needle back on and you'd do all this kind of stuff. So we all really, without realizing it, what we were doing, we were training our ears. So we thought kind of everyone was like that you could just hear something and then play it, because we weren't dependent on actually anything being written down. Mm-hmm. So right from very early on, I could hear something being played and I could kind of visualize it. I could actually kind of imagine playing it on the guitar. If I heard a phrase, let's get some pitch. If I heard a phrase, da be da be da, I knew. Be ba didn't do. So I could visualize where it was. If somebody sang a phrase to me, I could immediately play it back. If I heard something on a record or on the radio, then I could pick out the melody. So it was all to do with training the ear. Later on that I got into learning how to read music and write music down.
Do you remember struggling with it? Do you ever remember finding, like right at the beginning, learning? Who did you first try to learn? Who were the first guys?
Well,
was it Django and
it was Django. So as you can imagine, just as a little kid trying to play little Django phrases. But what I did, and this is something to remember, when you do this, only pick out little phrases. I used to pick out little things that I liked.
Rather than trying to learn a whole solo.
I'd hear something like, let's think of something. Something like that. I'd hear him play that. I'd sing it. Singing is the bridge. So if I heard something, I would then have it in my mind and sing it. That would be a kind of a phrase, but then I'd put the inflections that he put into it. You know. So I imitated that. But the thing you need to do to train your ear is actually don't do it with the guitar. Just sing it. So if you hear something, now if you can play the guitar, you know you've learnt scales. You know where the notes are. You know where everything is. Very often, when you then try and transpose onto the guitar something that you're listening to, this huge brick wall comes up in front of you, and you just can't get over that wall. And the thing to do is to use singing or vocalizing as your bridge. I call it vocalizing because I'm not a singer, so I just vocalize what I'm hearing. So if you just play me a little phrase. I won't look. Not that it matters.
In a specific
anything.
Key,
just a short phrase. Do it. Play one more time. You see, but I vocalized it first, and after.
But you went to the right pitch as well.
Well,
I'm just like, oh, hang on, that's almost like perfect pitch territory for me.
What happened was I'd already played. I don't have perfect pitch, but when I played that thing, just playing something in F. Mm-hmm. What that did, I've got relative pitch, so that kind of stayed in my head. So when I heard that, I knew round about where you were. If you played that in F sharp, I may not have known it. So, or if you played it in E, I may not have known. But I knew it was around about there. There was a little bit of luck. Plus, I did see your fingers out the side of my eyes. So just think of it like that. Think of vocalizing as the bridge that gets you to the other side from the music you're listening to, or whatever music you're creating in your own mind. This is another thing we get, I'd love to play something like that. Then you pick the guitar up and the guitar starts playing you. The guitar's in charge. It just goes into, you start playing all those things that you always play. This way, by vocalizing, you're really, the music is coming from inside you. that's your bridge to do that. It's almost like we have to train ourselves to do two things. So we have this skill of playing the musical instrument, in our case the guitar, but then also the skill of being able to internalize the music, and that vocalizing is the way of getting the music that's here or in here that you're hearing and getting onto there. After a while, what happens, you can sing a phrase and then play it. Then after a while you can do it in real time. So if I play, I'll show you this very quickly. Now, what I was doing there, if I play something like that, I'll say, what was I doing? And I'll say, well, you were singing along to your playing. I wasn't. I was actually playing along to my singing. What I was doing, I had some musical ideas, phrases that I was playing there. And what I was doing, I was thinking those and playing them, and I was vocalizing that. But I was doing that in real time. But you can do the same thing. You can sing, like we did there. This is something you can do. Just sitting at home is just find a little area on the guitar. It can just be something simple, C scale, and then just make up little melodies on those, using those notes. Do 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 do. And just little short phrases and copy them, and you can start getting a little more complicated. Then after a while you can start vocalizing and playing at the same time. Then you drop the vocalizing and you're just playing, and then you're able to play exactly what you're thinking.
Do you find that even with faster lines? So I'm just speaking from my own experience. The things that I have trouble hearing, because I feel like I can hear in a simpler context.
Yeah.
But I have trouble hearing complex lines or anything to do with complex harmony. So if somebody puts a nasty thing like giant steps or anything with a lot of changes, my ear seems to dislike the idea of trying to hear things anymore.
Yeah.
So in a diatonic context or a simple like polka dots and moon moves or whatever, I can hear because it's all kind of diatonic.
Yeah.
My ears will behave itself. But
Yeah.
as soon as it goes very chromatic or there are a lot of changes, it
That's
just
right.
starts going no, and I'm sure I'm not alone on this.
Well, yeah, no, you're not. Then that's taken it a step further, and not everyone can get to that point easily. You have to do a lot of work to get to that point. And even so, I mean, if I was learning something, sometimes it would be good for me to actually have a chart. I don't do tab really. I prefer just notation, but I would only use that as reference. It's not. I wouldn't learn it from that. I would sooner learn by ear. Occasionally, I get to do work with other musicians who will send me the music, and I say, well, the sheet music, and I'll say, no, if you got a recording of it, just send me the recording, because that way it gets in here a lot easier. Otherwise, it always stays on the page for me.
But do you never have to think then about a more complex tune? I'm trying to think of ones with horrible changes that isn't giant steps. I Thought About You. That's got
okay.
You're familiar with
It's got a kind of. Yeah.
But it's got funny changes behind the nice melody, so you don't have to think. If I don't know the changes to that to back it, but you wouldn't have to think like, oh, we're in this, or these arpeggios, or this scale, or any. That's redundant.
All of these kind of changes are transferable. So there are changes in there, so you can do this. It's a chromatic run
Series
first.
of 2 5s.
And you can do 2 5s. So in my mind, I know I can play. So I kind of hear that, and I hear little target notes as well. What I do a lot of the time is if I'm playing something over changes, I don't think of every note in that chord. I would just think of the root note and probably the third and the seventh, or the third very often as the 10th. So I would just think of that as da 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 da
I think you can do this. This is just not fair. You shouldn't be allowed to just.
No, so it's just a skeleton.
Yes, that's it, yeah.
But you see, as I'm playing that, you can see the way I'm fingering that. I've kind of got the shape of the chord, but it means that then I can then play other lines.
Are you hearing that as well? Sorry to interrupt you,
So,
but
okay.
I know that I think that it's harder for us humans to be able to comprehend what it is, how you do it. So do you hear that as well? Do you hear the
yes.
harmonic changes?
Yeah, now this is something that not everybody has, or takes a while for them to develop, is actually to be able to hear chords. Because it's one thing hearing a single line, but then actually to hear a whole chord in your head, a whole harmony, is something that comes with a bit more practice.
So are you hearing the harmonic skeleton,
Yeah.
or are you hearing the whole detail? Whether because I know your arrangements are quite complex. You're often playing a bass line, a melody, and internal moving lines as well. So are you hearing all of those things at the same time?
I'm hearing the skeleton of it, but then I know I can play. I can bring that in my mind, but I just break it down to that skeleton, because you can always add to that. It's very interesting that you say, and a lot of people say that my solo things are complex. They are, but the only reason I'm able to do that is because I actually break everything down to its simplest parts first, and then I build it up. It's not like I pick the guitar up and go wham and start playing all these different lines together. It's because I am able to break it down to a very, very basic intervals, and then add to those. That's really how that works.
Is it? Do you feel like it's a compositional thing, that you're creating compositions as you're hearing it, or is it more, I'm trying to think of other examples, in your version of I Got Rhythm, which I think is incredible, I can get hearing the melody, and I've had a go myself at doing similar things where I've played a melody and then found a bass line and tried to figure out how I could get my fingers around it.
That's a kind of extreme version idea, because that's something that I play. That I got the idea from listening to ragtime piano players and playing that kind of left hand, this kind of. But when I'm playing that, I am just thinking of those major minor tenths. I've got that skeleton of that going around in my mind. But what you're saying about the composition, I mean that's pretty much an arrangement that I worked out.
You had to work on that, as opposed to
I do a little bit of, I change around a little bit, and over a period of time it's changed, it's evolved. The great jazz saxophone player Wayne Shorter says, talking about the difference between composing and improvising, and he just sees it all as the same thing as I do. I believe, and he came out with a great thing that just described it perfectly. He said, when I improvise, I compose fast. And when I compose, I improvise slowly. So they're exactly the same thing. It's just that one is bang on the spur. This is your moment. Time's just going along, and you just have to do it. When you're composing, you can think about it. You can come up with a few bars, then you can go and make yourself a coffee, go for a walk, come back, and do something else. But when you're improvising, it's absolutely in the moment. That's one of the great exciting things about improvising, is that another thing about improvising is that it's about making decisions. If you're indecisive, if you're kind of an indecisive person, actually composing is the same, because composing and improvising, but you can drive yourself crazy composing, because you think, should I do it that way or should I do it there? Because I've got to make a decision. I can either go up there or down there. So you have those things. When you're improvising, you've got to make those decisions as well. But they're on the absolutely in the moment. And if you've got that kind of indecisive thing, you'll never get anywhere.
Not take the indecision away. If you're just playing what you hear, then there's no.
Well,
you can't think of it. Well, I've never had the.
If I was improvising in a jazz situation with say a piano bass drums type of setup, the solo that I'm playing on my guitar is actually the solo that's going on in my mind. And one of the things that I used to practice, and I used to sometimes do it just before a gig, rather than actually picking. A lot of the practice that I've done over the years, and I still do, is without the guitar. I just kind of imagine playing, and that way I don't get confined by the actual technicality of playing the guitar. So what I would very often do before I played, I would just imagine myself playing a great solo and try and get this solo going around in my head, and then when I picked up the guitar I tried to replicate that. But of course with jazz there's one of the things about playing jazz is there's a lot of knowledge that you've got to get. First of all, you've got to learn about harmony. This is really the main thing. You've got to know how harmony works. You've got to know how you can substitute chords, know how you can move lines around, what you can kind of lines that you can play.
So the kind of the theory behind.
Yeah. So there's a lot to learn before you actually get into playing. Well, you can do that at the same time. It's not like, I mean, some playing. I mean, blues guitar. It's about tone and feeling, isn't it? That's really you get the sound, you get that great sound, and you get that feel, and you get that phrasing, and you've got it. You got it. With jazz, we have that too. Obviously, sound is really number one there. You've got to really get a good sound. You've got to know how to phrase things, how to get the feel and get the emotion in playing as well. But you've got all this other, knowledge you've got to gather as well, which is the kind of knowledge that actually, like classical composers and orchestrators and arrangers, they have that kind of knowledge as well.
Is it? Am I right in thinking that all of those kind of techniques you've practiced until they've become instinctive? So if you're doing a tritone substitution, I'm fairly certain that you're not going, I play this D minor, okay, instead of playing a G7 here, I'm going to play a D flat 7 going to my...
Right.
I've got a feeling you don't think like that.
No, so you don't think... No,
you've
because...
just done it 1,000 times and it happens.
Yeah. Well, it's like... music is a language, and... different styles of music are just different languages, or different accents. So when you learn a language, you have to learn a vocabulary, you have to learn the grammar, you have to form sentences, how it all works. And playing music is just the same. And playing jazz is learning a language. So it's not something that happens magically. But if you want to learn to speak Spanish, what's the best way to do that? Meet the Spanish person and just get them to speak to you in Spanish. Watch Spanish TV, watch Spanish radio, immerse yourself in it, so that you just get. And that's what it was for me. My father was a jazz musician; he was a bass player, so I grew up with this music. So before I even really got into playing, that music was under my skin. So it was a language
Did
that
you have
I
to
knew.
learn the language then? So that, like when you're, I'm assuming when you said that you were working out how to play Django tunes or whatever, were you conscious of kind of learning, I don't want to call them licks, phrases or words?
Well, they were.
Words.
No, they a lot of them were phrases. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't analysing it and saying, well, this is a 3-6-2-5. One descending chromatically or something. I didn't think that. I just knew the sound of it. So it's like learning a language but not being able to read or write it first of all, but learning to read and write the language after.
But that's probably better, right? I'd rather learn the language instinctively than be able to read it and write it but not converse with someone.
Well, I think so, but then I'm probably a little biased on this, but I certainly think that way. I know when I went to school, we learnt French, but we learnt it as an academic subject, so we learnt to read it and write it. And by the time I left school, I couldn't speak French. You know, I had an academic understanding of it, but when I went to France, I couldn't speak to anyone, didn't know what they were talking about. And it wasn't until I actually spent a lot of time in France, and I lived in France for a while, that I started to pick up the language and understand what people were saying to me, and being able to make myself understood. And all that stuff that I'd learnt, the academic side of it, kind of helped me a little bit, you know, because I remember, what's the word for that? Oh yeah, I remember that, right, okay, remember the word. I didn't know how to put it together necessarily.
So when did you start to make sense of the phrases that you'd learned? At what point did you start going, well, I need to understand that this is a 2-5-1, or this is a minor 2-5, or this is using that?
Well, it was many years before I even heard the expression, the 2-5-1.
Where did the connection happen? Were you reading books? Was it Mickey Baker's Hot Jazz Guitar?
No, I never had lessons. I never ever looked at a guitar book or a tutor book. It was really just, I used to go along to my dad's gigs and just get up there and play. Do you know such and such a tune? Yeah, okay. Sweet Georgia Brown. Okay, what key? Yeah, and play it. And then it all sort of came together. Some of the phrases that I heard, some of the phrases I heard the trumpet player playing, I would imitate those and knew that this fitted over there. My father wasn't a schooled musician at all. He didn't take up music till he was 30, and he said to me, it was just so simple. Sometimes we just overcomplicate things. We just make it far too complicated. I remember my dad playing me a record of Django, and Django played the melody. I can't remember what the tune was, and then he played it the first time round. The second time round, then Django went into this whole other thing on there, and then my dad, because he was really excited, he said to me, "See what I was? I don't know. I was about 8-9 years old or something. I was playing guitar by then, and he said, hear what he's doing there. What he's doing there, he's improvising." I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, they're still playing the same chords." He said, "But he's making up his own melody as he's going along." So I understood that. So that was so simple. And when I look at all the early jazz greats, looking at Django, looking at Louis Armstrong, Django got a lot of inspiration from Louis Armstrong, Bix Beiderbecke, although those early players, Django, Stefan Grappelli, of course, who I worked with for years, that's how they played. They were melodic improvisers. They would take the melody and then they would vary the melody. So it's something that came from classical music, you know, all the
variations,
variations on a theme, and you know all the famous European classical composers were all improvisers. They could all get up and they were all doing gigs on the harpsichord, improvising, you know, in little house parties and things, and because they were composers and improvisers, you know. Compose slowly, improvise fast. So that I understood that, and I think sometimes I like to teach my students melodic improvisation. Just take a tune and then vary it, make it very different. You can vary that. Give it a jazz feel. Add some chromatics. There you go. See, so that's just a very simple melody. Starting to just vary it slightly, then take it a little bit further and a little bit further. But of course, underneath that, you have to have the knowledge of knowing the harmonic structure to something.
Exactly. So, but I think for myself, and probably a lot of them out there are going to wonder how on earth you get from the beginning of that to the end of that, because I take it that you're hearing it, but that language element of being able to go, oh, I'm going to throw in some chromatics. It's not random chromatics, and it's just stuff that you've absorbed yourself in jazz enough
yes.
that you inherently know without having to think of it.
I've listened a lot to jazz. So again, coming back to a language, if you're learning French, listen a lot to people speaking French, and after a while you will understand the language. And I grew up listening to jazz, so I understand that language. As far as chromatics go, chromatics are great because they're notes that shouldn't be there. They're passing notes, they're just passing through. But what they do is they add attention to something. So sometimes you're playing something to save it being a little square or a little too pretty, you want to add a bit of edge to it. You put some chromatics in there because they're notes that are going somewhere. And even though you might hit that chromatic in the middle of two notes, the ear, and actually physically you can feel it, that it needs to go somewhere. Yeah. So yeah, chromatics can be a good thing to.
Did you ever study that stuff then, like using the altered dominant scale? Did you ever learn? Do you know how to play the altered dominant scale?
No, show me how it goes.
I know something that Martin Taylor doesn't know. Yeah.
Go on then.
Victory.
Okay.
You must know the sound of that.
Oh, that's great. Oh, all right. Okay.
You must. That sound, I'm sure,
yeah.
is that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you do know it, but you just.
Yeah, but I would think of that as you see every harmonic thing you can see it in a different way. I would see that as a D flat.
D flat 13.
Yeah, that's a lot of guitar players when they first get into playing jazz. One of the first phrases, the licks they learn is kind of Barney Kessler.
Absolutely.
That's the thing you're talking about
it's
there.
Exactly, because it's a. I think it's I'm not sure if trap is the right word, but for people like me that would like to play better jazz, those kind of techniques I think are easier to believe they're going to help you than spending a long time with ear training. And I think now I unfortunately probably a little bit late, but I'm only just realising how important that other side of just listening and learning to play what you hear rather than letting your guitar rule the fingerboard. That's really important.
It's like if you hear a language, we'll say it's French, then you know how to say something in French, and you know French. So if you want to ask for something, you know you can say that, and that is a way of asking for that. But then there's subtleties to asking. You can ask in a different way. You can put an accent on a certain word, which could sound, just by saying one word slightly differently, you could sound sarcastic, or you could sound funny, or you could change the words around. You could use a different phrase. That's why I noticed this, and no offense to my American friends, because I work a lot in America. Something I've noticed a big difference between English, which I speak, and American English is that we seem to have lots of different ways of saying things. If you've lived in this country a long time, it says there's not one kind of set phrase to say something. We have lots of different subtleties to express something. Whereas with American English, there's kind of this is the phrase you use for this. There are variations, but not as many. Whereas, and you go to different parts of the UK, and you'll hear all these different variations of different ways that you can say something. It's exactly the same with music. There's infinite ways that you can express the same thing.
I take it then you never made yourself a lick book. You didn't sit down and write down in tab all your favourite Django licks. No,
there are a lot of jazz musicians that if you say about playing licks, they get a bit on their high horse about it and say, we don't play licks, we're improvisers. But of course you do. You listen to Django, you listen to Wes Montgomery, you listen to Joe Pass, you listen to all the great jazz guitar players, you listen to Pat Metheny, Mike Stern, John Schofield, everyone. They've all got their little trademark things, because it's like a speech pattern. It's like an accent, and we have our speech patterns that we are very, very recognisable, and those little phrases are those speech patterns.
See, this is we've gone a long way around, but this is exactly coming back to.
I tend to go the long way to everything.
It's good. We've come back to that idea of expressing something in your head, because that's what we do with language. I don't have to plan every word that I'm thinking before I speak it to you. It happens
when you read a newspaper. You don't read every individual letter. You don't even. When you learn to, when you're a little kid and you learn to read, and you learn how when that letter's put together with that letter, it produces that sound, and then you learn words, you learn to recognize a word. After a while you learn to recognize sentences, then you learn to recognize paragraphs. You get some people that can really, you show them a page of a book and they can read it, and they take it all in very quickly. Then the next page, I'm not able to do that. But if I read, I would read a sentence at a time, or even if it's a short paragraph, I can see what that is. We do the same thing in music. If you're reading, musicians that are good readers and orchestral players, that's what they do. They're always looking ahead. They're 4-8 bars or even more ahead of what they're actually playing. That's why when they wanted to bring in iPads for orchestras, and they would flip over the pages. At first it was impossible because different players had different rates. They were all at different places. So it wasn't until they actually invented a little pedal where everyone could individually turn the page that they could get it to work. So when I'm improvising, I'm looking ahead all the time.
I was just about to ask you that, because if there are obviously physical limitations to the guitar, and you probably don't want to hear something that you can't do. Do you see what I mean? So is that, how does that
also
work?
With improvising, you building up this vocabulary, your own personal vocabulary in improvising. You know there are certain things that if you play that, you know that you can then go to there. And then when you get to work with other improvisers, you get to really read their minds. I know what the next phrase is going to be, or I know roughly where it's going to go. But there are some players that constantly surprise you. But you get to really, a lot of improvisers say you get into this telepathy. But what it is, you just get to know how the other person's mind's working. You get into each other's heads as improvisers.
Do you get some of that from the social thing as well? Like, I know you work a lot with Tommy. Do you feel like because you hang out, you get a certain rapport that comes out on a musical level? With Tommy, because we off stage and on stage, we're always having a bit of a laugh. We're always having fun. We're both we both enjoy a good laugh, and telling jokes or just seeing the funny side to anything. So sometimes I can play something and I know that will spark something. I'll throw something in there because I know it will make Tommy do something, or he'll do the same for me, or he'll play something and I'll copy it, but I'll copy it in a humorous way, so that maybe it's not quite right or something, and he will do the same for me. So you have this conversation going backwards and forwards. That's one of the nice things about working in a duo situation, just two musicians, where you can have that conversation. It gets a bit more complicated the more musicians are getting involved. It's funny, there's quite a few some great guitar players that I've met and had a chat to who don't hear as comprehensively as you, and I've spoken to Tommy before, and I know he has a similar thing that he used to do with his brother, where they used to sit back to back, and Phil would play something and Tommy would have to figure out what it was. So it's the same sort of thing. So the two of you having such good expressive ideas is an incredible duet to have going on, to be able to communicate.
Well, there's a lot of similarities with Tommy and I, even though we played different music. I came from a purely jazz background, and Tommy came from a rock and country background, but we both started playing when we were about the same age, about 4 years old. We both played in our father's bands when we were kids. We both left school when we were really young and went on the road. There's a lot of similarities that we have. So our journeys were for many years, we're going in parallel, different sides of the globe. Me here in the UK and Tommy in Australia, and we didn't know each other. It wasn't until I went to Australia. It wasn't the first time I went to Australia, but it was the second time I went. 1990. Yes, I went there with Stefan Grappelli in 1990. 91. Then I went there on my own to do a solo thing. I went on a TV show called Hey Hey It's Saturday.
Oh, you did the Hey Hey thing?
Yeah, I see you're Australian, so I knew that would
exactly,
impress you.
Absolutely.
So I was on Hey Hey, and Tommy was watching, and he rang me up, and then we got together and we became friends. Then we found out that we'd been living kind of parallel lives on the other side of the planet.
So when was that? When did you first hook up with Tommy? 90s?
91. 91, 90, yeah, 91 I think it would have been.
Wow, I remember that show. It doesn't exist anymore. Hey Hey.
No, it was good because Daryl Summer, who had the show, for anybody that's not from Australia, Hey Hey It's Saturday started out as a puppet show for kids, but the guys were so good and it was so funny that all the adults used to watch it. So it then became the biggest kind of variety show on a Saturday evening. And
the guitar player in the house band, Simon Patterson, he's a Tasmanian.
Simon Patterson, I know
Simon.
Simon.
Really good friend of mine, and first inspired me to keep going with the guitar thing. He used to come and see me play in pubs and go, you can do it, kid. You should go and keep at it.
I saw Simon just 2 years ago when I was in Tasmania. If you're watching, Simon, hello, nice to see you again. So so that was a really good program. I remember I did it a couple of times. The last time I was on there. The first time I did it, I can't remember who else. There was a singer.
You're doing a solo thing? Yeah,
I just did a solo set. That was the first time. Second time I did it, I was a guest, and the other guests would take that. So they used to.
They didn't ask you to join?
No, they didn't ask me to join. I was too old even then.
Well, thank you so much for joining me, Martin. It's been a real pleasure seeing you again.
Oh, it's always good to see you.
I'll put some links up to Martin's stuff, and he runs some great teaching websites and stuff as well. So I'll put some links for that in the description. So go and check it out, and we'll see you all again very soon.